Super excited about this next speaker. In these times, and in all times, fundraising is critical, right? In order to eat and sustain ourselves and to build community. And one of the primary platforms that many of us in the game creation space have used is Kickstarter. We have the great fortune today to have Anya Combs, the director of games from Kickstarter. I had the privilege of working in the same sphere as her at MTV Networks, when she was at Nickelodeon, Addicted Games, launching games there. But now those games touch a lot of people, but now Kickstarter is touching so many people and empowering so many of us developers to move forward. So I just want to thank her for making time, and she has a fantastic presentation for us, and we just welcome your questions. And my dream obviously is that someone in this crowd hears her, truly hears her, and goes and applies it to their Kickstarter, and then we can all reconvene at a future talk, and there'll be a moment. So let's begin that learning right now. Anya, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you everybody for having me. I'm really excited. I'm going to share my screen, which technology always works, right? So there's definitely going to be no issues here. So we'll try this. I have a bit of a presentation to show you all, which I'm very, very excited. I believe you should be able to see that. Can I get a confirmation that you can see it? I'm going to move forward like you can. Great. So Kickstarter, super excited to talk to you all. I have, let me just check this. Okay. So I have a lot of slides. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly as I possibly can. So Kickstarter, again, thank you for having me. Super excited. Who am I? My name is Anya. I've been in the games industry a long time. This will be my 12th year in games. I'm the former Addicting Games developer relations person. I found a lot of the games for the Addicting Games website. It was very weird and fun. And now I'm the director of games at Kickstarter, which is pretty great. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna double confirm that you all can see this by the chat, which of course I can't do. So I'm gonna assume that everything's fine. So what is Kickstarter's mission, right? So Kickstarter's mission is to bring creative projects to life. We do that by connecting people to the projects that they love, and we like to think that we do that better than anyone. People from nearly every country on Earth have backed a project. That does include all 7 continents, right? So all 7 continents have at least one person that has backed a Kickstarter project. So that does include Antarctica. I just assume there's like someone in Antarctica just like backing Kickstarter projects, which is really funny to me. Kickstarter has the largest and most engaged funding community. We have 17 million people that have backed a Kickstarter project. I do just want to note, of that 17 million people, 5.9 million of them have actually backed more than one project. So we have a pretty large community of people that are constantly backing Kickstarter projects. And that has led to 61 million pledges made to all projects in the life cycle of Kickstarter. Kickstarter turned 11 years old today, so these numbers are representing 11 years worth of backing. Kickstarter backers have already pledged $4.9 billion, right? Huge, which has allowed funding for over 182,000 creative projects. That's 182,000 successful projects. So we have a lot of money that comes into Kickstarter, but more importantly, we have a lot of creative projects that come to Kickstarter, which is really fantastic. So games being such a huge part of this, right? Let's look at some of the games category stats. So $1.2 billion has been pledged just to games. And of that $1.2 billion that has been pledged, $1.1 billion has been raised. So there's a significant amount of the money that comes into Kickstarter is thanks to games and games creators like yourself. We have 21,200 successful projects. And 3.8 million backers in the games category. I put this success rate stat because I think it's interesting. So 40.9% is our success rate, right, for all of games. What was interesting is the Kickstarter success rate is 37.8. So it's a pretty high likelihood that if you launch a games project, you'll probably be relatively successful. And I have to say, last year was such a huge year for us. $1 billion was pledged to games. This is massive, right? That's just a gigantic amount of money. So thanks to all of you, creators, backers, anybody that's been associated with Kickstarter, you have helped contribute to this. So thank you. And we don't necessarily like to look at things in terms of video games and tabletop games. And, you know, obviously video games, VR kind of fits into that space. There are some tabletop projects that do include like a VR element. It's rare, but it does happen. But just to kind of look at things from a very like sort of 2x2 perspective. So the video games category, 259 million has been pledged. So 222 million has been raised. 14,400 projects launched, and of that, about almost 3,200 of those have been successful. So that leads to a 21.9% success rate. But what's interesting here is in 2019, that was actually, and again, these numbers are representative of the entire lifespan of Kickstarter. So that 21.9% success rate includes the 11 years, but last year alone, in 2019, the success rate was 26.5%. And so far in 2020, it's 25.2%. So video games are still making it happen. And there are about 1.8 million backers in the video games category. And I put this slide specifically in here because one of the things that I hear pretty frequently is if you back a Kickstarter project, it doesn't happen, right? They just take the money and run. And the truth is that's not true. So there was an independent study done in 2015, and we found that as the whole of Kickstarter, about 90% of projects actually do come out. So roughly 10% of projects don't come out. And most of the time it's due to like extenuating circumstances. So for example, someone quits the team. You have a situation where maybe, you know, the worst case scenario is we had a creator just straight up pass away, which was absolutely terrible. That was a bad day. But more often than not, it's mismanagement of money or mismanagement at the time. But I wanted to show this slide because I think this is so cool to kind of see how many like popular games have actually come through Kickstarter. A couple others that I wasn't able to include here include Moonlighter, Amplitude, Strafe, Home Free, Pinstripe, Bat Dragon Cancer. Most recently, Sea of Stars funded. This year alone, we've had 3 separate projects that have in video games that have all raised over $1 million, which is pretty cool. If you want to see more, you can go to kickstarter.com/play, where we host all of the games that do come out on Steam. If for whatever reason you see a Kickstarter game that is out on Steam that is not listed there, let me know. I have my contact information at the end of this, and I'm happy to show you. But that does lead us into tabletop games, which obviously is very, very popular and very successful. $908 million pledged, 874 of that has been successfully raised. 23,750 launched projects, 14,190 of those have been successful. The success rate in tabletop games is roughly 60%. Again, lifespan of Kickstarter here. In 2019, that was 66.9% success rate. And so far this year in 2020, it's 70.4%. So things are happening in tabletop games, to say the least. There's also a huge community of backers just in tabletop. So 2.1 million people have backed a tabletop project, which is pretty great. And so I wanted to just quickly touch on virtual reality specifically here. So in the lifespan of Kickstarter, there's been about 11 million, pop quiz, and I cannot close that. Sorry, I'm gonna have to stop sharing my screen for a second to close that. There we go. Okay, just make sure all of this is happening. Great, okay, you all can see my screen. I was a little nervous that people were like chatting me like, we can't see it.
We can see you and you're amazing. Just
oh,
so you know.
Thanks. I can't get this chat to go away now though. There we go. Okay. I'm so bad at Zoom. I'm sorry. So anyway, sorry. $11 million has been pledged to the entirety of every VR project that's been on Kickstarter. This does include projects that are not just games, but like film, other experiences, right, for virtual reality. So 2.1 million of that was raised in 2019 alone, which is kind of cool. And I just wanted to touch on this success rate, which is 19.4%. In 2019, that success rate was actually 25.3%. You know, as to why that is, there's a handful of different reasons, but I think it's that VR has just sort of become a little bit more popular. There has been 786 launch projects. There were 75 in games that launched alone last year, which is kind of cool. And of that 786 launch projects, 137 of them have been successful. I would note that in 2020, $175,000 has been pledged to VR projects alone. We've had 39 projects launch in 2020, and 4 of those have been successful. So looking at these numbers and saying to ourselves, okay, cool, there's obviously a huge ecosystem, there's a huge community, there's a lot happening. Well, what actually makes a good project? And I kind of boil this down into 2 different categories, which are the yeses and the nos. And I'll touch on a little bit of what is a yes and a no for virtual reality, because it is a little bit of a different beast. Roughly though, the things that you need to have are gameplay. You have to be able to show at least 30 seconds of gameplay. So that's 30 seconds within your video, and also GIFs that are with that throughout your page, right? Your video should be short. It should be like 1 to 2 minutes at most in length. Community building. So building a community ahead of time is really sort of like the secret sauce to Kickstarter. So we see on the back end of things that roughly there's like a 70-30 split. So roughly 30% of your pledges will come in through Kickstarter, and roughly 70% of the pledges will come in through the community that you're able to build. So you want to build your community early, and you want to build them often. Your main project image. So that main project image that is shown like right before your video plays, it should showcase what the game or the experience is, right? So if it's your face, that's great, like cool. Are you the game though, right? So it should be just like a really high quality image to really show what the game is. You also want to avoid having any sort of badges or additional text on that, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Being honest. This is a big one, right? So like if there's a delay of any kind, which I think anyone that's ever been involved in a video game knows what I'm talking about, a development delay, that's okay. As long as you communicate it, people are much more willing to like open those lines of communication to you. And lastly, your project should only run about 30 to 35 days. Anything over that is too long, and anything less is too short. We've done a lot of research on this, and 30 to 35 days seems to be sort of like the ideal. So what are the things that are no? Not having a video, right? So not having a video is just not an option. Not having an update, no, like not posting any updates. The thing to keep in mind here is updates, you want to post an update every other day on your Kickstarter. You want to kind of show people that you're engaged with what's going on. Having a bad launch day. So we've seen that launching on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and any major US holiday is a big no-no. For whatever reason, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, again, provided it's not a major US holiday, I'm thinking 4th of July as example, if it does fall on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Aside from that, Tuesday and Wednesdays, really, really good days to launch. Showing your stretch goals as soon as the project launches. You wanna hold your stretch goals off until you've actually met your initial funding goal. Once you've met that initial funding goal, then you can launch your stretch goals. Relying on press, this is a big one. Press, influencers, YouTubers, streamers, that whole space, if you can get them to talk about your game, have any sort of interaction with your live Kickstarter project, that's fantastic. But the reality is they're not going to really bring in pledges. Community is what's going to bring in your pledges. And lastly, ghosting your backers. Kind of what I said to the yes, same thing with a no. Don't just ghost your community. You kind of have to speak to them. When it comes to VR, the thing that's interesting here that to keep in mind is you're talking to a community of people that maybe don't have, you're basically only talking to a community of people that have a device, right? So you really want to target the community of people who have the device for the thing that you're making it for. If you're looking to sort of the general public of people that are like, yeah, I'll back that because I think VR is cool, it's pretty small. So you really want to target communities for people who have a VR device that are excited to participate in the process with you. This is a big one that I get, but what if I fail? So to me, there's no such thing as a failed Kickstarter project. There are projects that do not fund, but that's as simple as it is, right? And I say that because you can always relaunch your project. It's totally okay. To me, the only time someone has failed on Kickstarter is if they haven't learned anything. And I say that from the perspective of there's a number of projects who maybe didn't fund their first time around, but they learned a lot. They were able to build a larger community. They got a publisher, or they found someone that they wanted to be part of the team to make the game better. Then they either came back to Kickstarter or relaunched, or they just kind of continued on that publishing deal. So don't think about not funding as this like terrible thing. Sometimes not funding can actually be a good thing. So the number one question I get of how do I get featured on Kickstarter? So all of our features are managed by an editorial team. My job is to reach out to that team and advocate for you as creators. I have my contact information at the end, but there's no like algorithm or like if you make a bunch of money or if you get a bunch of backers, you're automatically featured. That's not the case. Everything is done by actual humans like typing to make those features happen. So what is it that that team looks for? So they look, again, for a strong project image, gameplay GIFs to show what the game is. And please talk to me and my teammate, John Ritter, and if you're in Europe, Michael Lieb. Talk to us early and talk to us often. Lastly, the games newsletter. We have a newsletter that is specifically for games. It goes out to about 180,000 people. So it's like pretty fantastic. I mentioned badges. This is an example of a badge. Do not put this or any other unnecessary text or images on your main project page, right? On that main project image. Other examples of these badges aside from pre-order and support on Kickstarter and things like that, other examples of that are like funded in 2 hours or like, you know, now live, like of course it's live, you're on Kickstarter, we can see it. But the badges are just kind of distract from what the actual project is, distracts from the experience. So just like, don't do it. So I wanted to just very quickly, because I know we're sort of low on time and I do want to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A as I believe we have scheduled. I wanted to go through 2 VR projects. This first one is a game called Lo-Fi. It's the next generation cyberpunk virtual reality. It's the spiritual successor to Technolust. Technolust actually was a Kickstarter project that funded in 2014. And so this creator came back and they brought their second game to Kickstarter, which is kind of cool. So this was like the spiritual successor to their first game. So they did this really cool thing, which I see more people doing, which makes me really happy. When you have a successful Kickstarter project, you can actually do this even if you aren't successful, but you have access to your updates like we talked about in the beginning, right? Like updating every other day. And then once your project is done, maybe update once a week, maybe update once a month. Like you don't have to update every other day once your project is funded. But you still have access to continuously like update your project. And so what this creator did is as soon as their new project was live, they posted an update to that first community, that first project, and said, hey, our second project is live, come back our next project, right? So tapping again into this is something that I like, more people should be doing this if they're repeat creators, like make sure you post an update to this, to like the second, third, fourth, fifth project that you're creating. It just like sort of reinforces like, hey, I'm back, I'm excited to continue to do this again. And as you can see, this was a very successful project. It funded last year. It was a 30-day campaign. They are actually based in Canada. So this is all USD, so $77,843. They had almost 1,700 backers, which is kind of fantastic. Like these numbers are really kind of wild. This is a team, Iris VR, who is a gentleman named Blair, I believe it's a person named Blair Renah. They're based in Toronto, and they have over 24 years of game development experience. So they're very versed in the world of games, right? Which to me means that this is a person who is very deeply involved in community. When you launch a Kickstarter project, you have access to this information on the back end, which I'm happy to show you. And there's a couple things here that I want to really quickly point out. So one of the things I hear a lot is, well, if I don't fund within 2 days, my project is doomed. As you can see, this is not the case, right? So even if your project hasn't funded halfway through, or if you still have like 2 days left, don't cancel your project. I've seen projects fund the last hour. I've seen projects fund the last week. Like we say 30 to 35 days for a reason, right? This reinforces a lot of the things that I'm talking about. But the 2 things that I wanted to point out here is the first part of this graph, which is you can kind of see the first like 2 days, there's a high level of activity, which leads us into the last day, right? That last day has a huge push of activity on their page. And part of the reason this is when you look on any Kickstarter project that's live, you have the pledge button and you have a remind me button. that remind me button, if you click that button, that sends an email to a backer that says, hey, there's 48 hours left in this project. Do you want to back it? So typically, I mean, this is sort of an excessive case here, at least in the first couple of days. But typically your first couple of days will mirror your second couple of days. And as you can see, there's like the line kind of flattens, the curve is flattened, so to say, not to make a COVID joke. And this is pretty typical for every single project. It's pretty rare that there's graphs that are kind of all over the place. This sort of line is extremely common. And the last thing I want to point out here is their pledge graph on the right-hand side. There's 3 different colors that you'll see. The green is that 30% that I mentioned at the beginning, which is roughly what comes in through Kickstarter. That sort of orange-yellow color is what's pledged from a community. However, this purple part, which is the most interesting part, this is from custom referral tags. So this is from like Facebook ads, Twitter ads, like newsletters, mailing lists. This is anything where you can kind of track where your pledges are coming in. And this is a really useful tool because let's say that you have 2 Facebook ads, for example, and you're like, I know this Facebook ad is just going to kill it. We're going to get a bunch of pledges. And the second ad, like, I don't know, maybe we'll see. And for whatever reason, let's say that second ad just like takes off. That gives you the information to say like, great, I should probably run that second ad again. And obviously we have to talk about Oculus here, right? This was a Kickstarter project. I think this is something that like not everyone knows was the case, but Oculus did come to Kickstarter. Came to Kickstarter pretty early on too, right? So they funded in 2012, September 1st, 2012, 30-day campaign, sticking with sort of that time frame, and over $2 million pledged to the project, which is kind of wild. The game had been, oh, sorry, this is the wrong slide, sorry. So 9,522 backers, obviously Oculus is the creator, right? And so this is one of the projects that really kind of like helped drive not only VR just as a whole, but also one of the sort of like gaming hardware projects that really kind of like started that trend, which is kind of cool. And as you can see, the funding progress was very quick. The reason there is no purple part of the pie for the custom ref tags is because that feature didn't exist when Oculus ran their project. But again, as you can see, the first 2 days, right, huge level of activity. Last 2 days, same kind of thing. So even in 2012, this sort of pie chart, and I would say this sort of line graph here is a little more typical of what we see compared to lo-fi. But it's still, you know, 7 years later, when lo-fi ran their project, still kind of the same sort of curve. And again, 26% of pledges coming in through Kickstarter, 73% through an external source. I would say what was interesting to me kind of like looking at all of this is one of the biggest drivers for Oculus was actually Reddit. I just thought that was really interesting because I know that Reddit has been really cautious about sort of like features and things like, or I'm sorry, self-promotion on Reddit. So I thought it was just kind of interesting that Reddit was such a huge driver for Oculus, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Also contextually thinking about 2012, all these different things. But even in 2012, that sort of like 30-70 split, obviously those numbers fluctuated a little bit here, but it was still pretty prevalent. So we continue to see that. So if there's anything that I can leave you with before we get to Q&A, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions, build your community. Build your community early and continue to build your community. Show your gameplay. You have to show your gameplay. 30 seconds of gameplay is just, it's absolutely necessary. Your gameplay should also be like as close to what the final project is gonna look like. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it should be pretty close. Keep your video short, 1 to 2 minutes at the most. And again, you don't need to fund on day one. We say 30 to 35 days for a reason. And make sure that you come talk to us. This is my information. You can email me personally at anya@kickstarter.com, or you can email games@kickstarter.com, just games@kickstarter.com. That also comes to me and my team. Or if Twitter is your thing, as the entire games industry is on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. My DMs are open. I am also someone who does not ask any questions in a Q&A atmosphere, even if it is digitally. I get really freaked out. So if you want to email me personally and ask any questions because this doesn't feel like the right forum for you, that's totally cool. I'm happy to take questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can.
I'm going to start sharing mine. That's
Great.
amazing. Oh my gosh. Okay. I want to do Q&A. I also want to just go start a Kickstarter right now. Now that I know what to do, I'm like, head start, let me go. Get that.
Awesome. I love it.
Wow. So we have questions, and just want to say once again, Skylar from our last panel, thank you for your comment from Facebook. Super excited. We're like on Facebook Live at the same time. We got comments and questions coming from all around.
Oh my gosh.
A question that I wanted to ask you was, how are you keeping trust during this change? And by that I mean, there's been an unexpected variable that affects everyone's Kickstarter in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Not only the creators, but also the consumers.
The backers too.
Yeah, the backers. Everyone's in. There's a new variable.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like I think the biggest thing here is that it's establishing those open lines of communication. And we sort of like tell people, like, don't overpromise things. And this is my biggest thing with stretch goals is like, I see so many stretch goals from people that are like, oh, I'm going to do a Switch version. And I'm like, did you talk to Nintendo? Or I'm going to do a Microsoft or an Xbox version. Did you talk to Microsoft? So in terms of establishing trust, like my team and I will constantly talk to anybody that is launching projects where we're like, wait, we have some questions about this. We try to have some stuff in place, but like, that's kind of one of the hardest parts, I think, for all of us is like, we don't exactly know what's going to happen. Right. And so in addition to just opening those lines of communication and telling people like, it's okay if you have to delay, like it's totally fine. Like, as long as you are like having those conversations with people, it's fine. But we also have some prompts that we're doing, something called Inside Voices and Lights Out. Lights Out is a little bit more for like venues and like spaces. And so St. Vitus, which is a metal, it's like a metal venue / bar here in New York City. They were going to completely close because they obviously didn't have any revenue coming in. And they launched a Kickstarter project to kind of help save their venue. So Lights On is a little bit more for like keeping the lights on, but Inside Voices is a prompt for like people that are kind of stuck at home, which are all of us. So maybe instead of doing like this really robust like 3D miniature project, why don't you do like a print and play version, something that people can like do in their homes?
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. That's great that you're doing like finding a new way to lift people up in this difficult time. I want to ask you one more question before we get to the crowd of questions and all the things. I don't know if you can see the chat. We're just getting a big pile of thank yous on you.
Awesome.
Could you talk a little bit about your guidance for people in the days before they launch the Kickstarter?
Yeah.
Right? When they want to get that, whatever their first 2 days is going to be, but what sort of things can they be doing better? What you found to be effective in that preparation time to flip the switch?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like we basically tell people to talk to us early and often. There's a misconception that like we want to see your project when it's like just ready to launch. And I want to see your project as soon as you're thinking of launching a Kickstarter project. Like the second that you're like, I think I want to launch a Kickstarter project, that's when you want to reach out to us. We want to be involved in that whole process of helping you create your page. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to go in and like, you know, tool around in assets and things like that. But I take a pretty strong stance that like, I'm happy to do as many rounds of feedback with creators as they want. It doesn't bother me at all. There's some people I have like every 2 weeks, we have a check-in just to kind of see what's going on with their project. But the biggest thing, honestly, that I see is people don't build a community before they come to Kickstarter. They think that they can just put like a game design document up there, which is just a lot of text and like some photos, but that's not necessarily representative of like what the final project is going to look like. So making sure that you like build that community before coming to Kickstarter is absolutely key.
Got it. Wow. Okay, let's get to some of the questions that people are asking here in the crowd. Hi, this one is going to be from Cheryl Espinoza, and their question is, thanks for sharing. You're going to share that. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? And what has been the trend for funding VR projects recently, like it's in this time on Kickstarter?
Yeah, so I can't share the PowerPoint, unfortunately. It's a whole thing, but I can condense some of the numbers down if that's totally cool. Yeah, we keep asking and they don't want us sharing PowerPoints. So
wait, hey, watch, Cheryl, is there a slide that you need them to go back to though? We could probably go back to a slide if we had to.
if you want to take a screenshot, that's totally
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're all family here. It's a legitimate question. I know that Jack was like, what about the key, the good and bad, the do's and don'ts slide? We might
I know.
Okay.
So in terms of like, to be perfectly honest, there hasn't been a lot of VR, right?
Sure.
I think part of that is it requires like a device kind of touching your face. And even though it might be your device, I think when it comes to testing, sometimes people get a little bit skittish about that. And I think it's also, again, it's one of those spaces where it's like, tabletop is so dominant on Kickstarter that when we do see a VR project, we're like, whoa, it's cool, right? So Firmament, which is from the team who made this last year, they funded and they were actually in our room at PAX East. And it was just kind of incredible to watch that project just kind of blow up. But I would say, obviously having, you know, a name and a studio attached to that project was much more helpful.
Understood. And I see, Cheryl, I see you're unhappy with this. Cheryl, we're going to solve this. Cheryl, when this is all over, you literally have Anya's direct contact info.
Yeah, email me.
So literally, we just made a connection right here. She literally is the director of Kickstarter Games. She knows everything that's in that deck, literally right here. But you've got a lot of questions. So I'm going to go to Norm Dabney's question, which is, when launching a mobile app or tabletop game, like you're alluding to, how many backers do I need to bring in from outside of Kickstarter in order to get Kickstarter to promote my game, so then it gets more backers originating in Kickstarter? For example, if I've got a $20,000 goal on a game, do I need to bring 80 backers or 10% out of the 800 backers from outside the ecosystem to Kickstarter?
No, so it's honestly as simple as I said. So it's roughly a 30-70 split. So 30% of your pledges are going to come in through Kickstarter, 70% are going to come in through the community that you build, right? In terms of getting like additional backers or like features and things like that, it's not a situation where you need to get X amount of backers and then you get a feature. It's just if we like your project. Like that's a God's honest truth. If someone from our team, if someone from Kickstarter is like, this is cool and I like it, and you'll get a project we love tag. I'm going to advocate for you a lot more for those tags and those features if I know you and I'm talking to you and I can speak to what your story is, right? But like Kickstarter projects, I think people look at Kickstarter projects maybe from like the wrong perspective. And the best way that I've ever heard it described is like, instead of looking at it from like, obviously like there's a business element to it and there's metrics that you should meet, and I get that, and great, 100%. However, the other side of it is you have 30 days to tell your story. So take those 30 days to tell what your story is. Why are you excited to launch this project? Why is this specific idea so important to you? Why does it need to be out there? And take that time to tell that story. That's going to bring in more people than just like, I got 80 backers. I got 80 backers, right? Like, which is great. And you should celebrate in that. That's good for an update. But for everything else that's public facing on Kickstarter, what's the story? Like day 1, here's my story. Day 2, I'm going to continue that story. Wrap it up by day 30.
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, sort of a continuation of that question, Anya, real quick, which is, given, I mean, what's going on, this is an anonymous question, but given the situation now, are there any guidance that you have about sensitivities, ways to communicate while you're growing a community during this time, when you are asking for people to fund something which is not a COVID charity,
right,
which is not, you know, save the world, to do this project? How are people communicating differently? Is there any guidance you can give people?
So I haven't seen the communication change too much on Kickstarter, but I get this question a lot from creators. Okay. And the thing that I would say about that is, I hear you. I have my own reservations sometimes about things, right? And like, there are certain companies that I'm not going to give my money to. Jeff Bezos is not getting $1 from me. He hasn't for a long time, and he won't. And that includes any sort of sub things that he does, right? Like, I'm not going to give you any money. But I would say one of the things that's important to keep in mind is, while we're all stuck inside, what's the thing that we're all doing? We're looking for content to like keep our time, right? So Kickstarter, for the most part, and like there's obviously like a couple exceptions to the rule. Like I think Critical Role is a good example of this, where they're not necessarily a small indie company, but they are a group of artists that are trying to make a thing. So everyone who's trying to make a thing right now is also just sort of in the same financial situation. Yes, unemployment is what, it's 16%. It's terrifying, right? But there's a lot of people too who are stuck at home that are like, oh my God, I'm like, it's great that I'm saving all this money, but like, I don't really know what to do with it. I'm going to go to Kickstarter. I'm going to go to Patreon. I'm going to go to Etsy. I'm going to go to these places where I know there's independent creators that want to make a thing to make my life better or to like enhance my creative experience, right? And they're expressing themselves through creative mediums. I would encourage people to look at it from that perspective and use that type of language.
Gotcha. Thank you. Quick technical question, and we are heading towards the break, people, because I get it. Self-care. This is great information, but sometimes your cup can just get full, and I get it. But Matt Buendia is asking, if the game was recently approved on Steam, is it too late to submit through Kickstarter?
I think it would depend on what it is that you want to do. That would be a follow-up conversation to have with me.
Okay, there you go. So follow up with Anya, who's literally in the room, who's literally the comic book. That's the best answer ever. I think there's a lot of questions which are all about building community and how big community do you need? And my question might be like, are there ongoing resources if there's a huge population of developers who are all sharing this question, right? That means there's an ongoing teaching need. Like, where should they be going? Not just even this moment, or not just to your email, but in general, what resources are they looking for? Like, I want a community around my vision, not just my design, but a community supporting like service. How should they be, where should they go?
Yeah, so you should reach out to community managers. Victoria Tran is an incredible community manager. For the tabletop space, Maya Coleman is an incredible community manager. The community managers are the experts in this space, and they're gonna be able to give you a heck of a lot more information than I can just from my very like rudimentary knowledge of community building. Oh, Harris Foster from Finji too.
Oh yeah, I'm in the Finji Discord, so good. All right, fair. Okay, there are a lot of questions. The real answer to all those questions is follow up with Anya. We, however, all of us collectively are gonna go on another break because we've all been here for a minute. I wanna thank Anya again. Please put a thank you in the chat. Thank you for, once again, trusting us with your time and
thank you.
Your knowledge and your awesomeness, period.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.